I'm Ken, and you're watching Celt Can Cook, the Scottish cooking channel that encourages young men and women to have confidence and competence they need to conquer the kitchen. As you can tell, we're not in the kitchen today. We are doing a red-headed reading episode for Christmas. Last year, we did Yes, Virginia, There Is a Santa Claus. This year, we're going to do Nativity. Both stories are by John C. Wright. Both stories are from his Book of Feasts and Seasons anthology, link down in the description below. I recommend you give it a look, because it's a fantastic story collection. But, we're going to go at it from here. Just like last year, because my Scottish brogue is a wee bit too harsh for reading the story, we are going to switch to received pronunciation British accent. So, join me as we read Nativity. Of course, my ever-present coffee as needed. Nativity. Mr. Wint, if you could visit anyone in the world, any time, any place, who would you go see? Oh, not for a long time. Long visits are never permitted. But just for a moment, just for an embrace or a long look. No longer? His words were not in English, and I did not speak any modern Romance tongues. But he must have been a priest or a scholar, because he and I could make ourselves understood to each other in Latin and in Greek. We were two living men with two dead languages in common. I was not sure where I was. The streets in these ancient cities are narrow and crooked, and they don't put the names on street signs. The stranger in the top hat and long coat did not linger to hear an answer. Now he paused to listen to some children singing carols. I remember they sang "O Come Emmanuel," but the words were not in English, while waiting for me to climb the alley. I had stopped walking. It was not that I was tired. It was just that I was so used to the broad and flat streets of the American Midwest. So, to me, the sight of a cobblestone street turning into a broad stair for part of its climb was a novelty. It was, no doubt, a street older than my whole nation. I wanted to make a comment to my wife, but she, of course, was not there. In my pocket was a small Christmas gift for her, wrapped in gold paper. I had put it in the pocket of my dark and formal coat that I had donned for the funeral. I had intended to leave it at the grave, but the idea of bright and cheery, frivolous colours of wrapping paper beneath the granite headstone on the darkness of the newly turned earth seemed unbearably hateful to me. And I still wanted to say something to her, to share my thoughts, to share my life. And I could not. So I had paused, wrestling with the aching emptiness inside me. I turned my eyes outward. Between the narrow and dark houses looming to either side, the gap of the alley fell like a stone waterfall, as if the stairs were the broken rapids, and in that gap I could see the famous city spread out below me, adorned to celebrate Christmas. I could see the festive lights in the distance. The stranger came up beside me, offering me a handful of roast chestnuts that he had bought from a street vendor. The children singing he had shooed away by passing out the brightly coloured paper which looked to me like Monopoly money. I gestured to the view below. We were halfway up one of the 7 hills. There are more Christmas trees than there were years ago. There are more Christmas trees than there were years ago. He said, "You have been to the Eternal City before?" My wife is from here. Was. She... Excuse me. He passed me a handkerchief, and turned as if to look at the city. The Christmas tree is a Germanic custom. Such things travel south to the more civilized nations somewhat slowly. It is the nativity scene where the Italian genius is manifested. You should see the ones displayed at the churches of Saints Cosmo and Damiano. It was commissioned by Charles III of Napoli. 6 master woodcarvers laboured on the scene for 40 years, adding new figures each year. And in the Santa Maria Maggiore, where the first Christmas Mass was said, is a presepe, the permanent display of the crib. The reliquary below the altar is said to contain pieces of the original manger. History is fascinating, is it not? Are you ready to go?" I nodded. The stranger walked a short way up the alley, took out an enormous key and bent over the lock of intricately wrought black iron gates. The iron gates were decorated with images of roses and winged skulls. With a groaning clang, they opened. Beyond was a courtyard shaped like an L, closed in on each side by windowless brick walls, and in the midst of the court was a dry well, filled with leaves and dust, rusting under a tiny roof. Around the corner of the courtyard, up the shorter arm of the L, were more stairs guarded by worn, winged lions, their gaping mouths filled with grit and dust, and the grime on their faces made them seem to weep. To my surprise, the front door to the old house was not locked. He opened the door and stood in the doorway, fumbling with something on a small table set immediately by the door. There was the click of an electric striker, a flicker of flame, and the stranger lit a candle, which he carefully placed in a black iron candlestick. Inside he went, lighting his way with the candle, beckoning me to follow. "The power is out?" I said. I could hear the singing of the children in the street below clearly enough, but the door was so heavy and so well fitted to the frame that all noise from the outside was cut off the moment I shut it. "There is power here," said the stranger, smiling crookedly. "More than enough to shatter the cosmos. But the site has never been electrified. It would identify the era too closely and disturb the anachronic echo effect. Come, the machine is in the attic." I followed him. A narrow wooden stairway led upward and upward. The walls to either side were painted with figures of satyrs chasing nymphs through patterns of grape leaves. But in the dim light, the figures seemed distorted, and the lolling tongues and goat-horned heads of the satyrs gave them sadistic, blank-eyed expressions. The attic was brighter than the house, because large and narrow skylights admitted the coloured hues of the festively lit city, as well as the slanting rays of the moon. In the middle of the blank wooden floor was a shape covered with a tarp. The stranger handed me the candle, stepped over, and drew aside the tarp with a theatrical flourish, like a stage magician, revealing his pretty assistant alive and unharmed. But a cloud of dust flew up at the breeze, and it blew out the candle, so the dramatic effect was ruined. I had no clear view of the machine. In the moonlight and the flicker of the changing Christmas lights from some nearby building taller than the house, I could see there was a small saddle or seat, facing two levers, connected to a rotating cylinder. The cylinder was connected by a mess of wires to a crystal bar that glinted strangely in the moonlight. This crystal formed the axis of the machine. My eyes could not focus properly on it. No matter how I moved my head, the inside reflections of the crystal bar seemed to be farther away than the body of the machine around it, as if it was not a crystal bar, but a crystal slot, or a well opening into unexpected depth. Behind the saddle was a large and upright copper disc connected to a gearbox. Pardon? The whole arrangement looked something like a crystal-poled metal parasol lying on its side, taking a ride on a sled. And the saddle straddled the pole, and the cylinder and levers formed an off-center handle. There were scrollwork and flourishes on the brass, a windrush on the copper disc, and little cherubic faces on the cylinder, which betrayed that this was made in the days when the machines were works of art, and machinists were magicians. The stranger said, "Unfortunately, the dials are decimal. It is an oddity of the inventor. This dial indicates how many tens of days you have passed through. This one, hundreds of days, thousands, tens of thousands. You will have to be clever in your calculations to know the month and year of your arrival." "Or I could just use my phone," I said, giving him an odd look. I was sure someone, somewhere on the internet, had set up an application to calculate such things. The stranger scowled and shrugged. "I am not familiar with such a gizmo." There was no Latin word for gizmo, of course. He just said the English word. If that is an English word. I said, "The book by H.G. Wells never gave the time traveller a name. You say he is real. Who is the inventor? Why is he not ruling the world?" He threw out his chest and spoke in solemn tones. "The time traveller is Nikola Tesla. Anyone reading that book by Wells in that day and age would have recognized the man as one part showman, would have recognized the man at once. Part showman, part magician, all genius. The machine itself was built in Menlo Park sometime during the 1870s, with the help and, to be blunt, despite the interference, of Thomas Alva Edison, who saw no practical use for it. In 1895, a man named George Sheriff, Tesla's legal and fiscal advisor, gave an account of Tesla's voyage into the future into the hands of Mr. Wells to put it into publishable form, since the account would not have been believed if given as fact. The machine was thought lost in the Great Fire that destroyed Mr. Edison's great factory in 1914. Mr. Tesla is not ruling the world because a Nazi agent killed him in 1943. I frowned at the stranger. How could a man as bright as Edison see no practical use for time travel? Anyone would see the advantage of being able to read tomorrow's stock market results or racing form. The machine did not perform well until it was taken to Scotland. America is a young nation. Why does that matter? The stranger said, "The machine works by a resonance effect. Think of time as a stream, but certain events are rocks in that stream. Rocks that make eddies, ripples, echoes. This is why there is no need for you to physically move the machine to the cottage where your wedding night took place. Merely touching your wedding ring to the forward cylinder will attune the crystal. Your wedding ring is an object that carries time with it. Anything used as a memento is." I instinctively clasped my hand over my ring, as if to protect it. "It is just a bit of gold. There must be something else involved. Something more." He nodded. "Time will never be understood by an era which divides matter from psyche, and disbelieves in everything but matter. Is eternity not a psychic reality? Mind and body are one, even as time and space are one. Man alone of all the beasts fears the future and regrets the past. Tesla understood this. The machine cannot be operated by any man who is too perfectly satisfied with his own time. The time traveller must yearn." I had been standing with my back to him, inspecting, as well as I could, the half-seen shapes and shadows of the machine. Now I turned, and the motion startled him, for he jumped back, putting his hand in his coat pocket, as if there were a gun there. I said, "So, that is why you were hovering like a vulture over the graveyard?" He said, "Think of it as a privilege, Mr. Wint. Not everyone can operate the machine. Very few are even allowed to try." Allowed? He licked his lips. "There is a certain danger to the operation of which, perhaps it slipped my mind and I failed to warn you." I uttered a sad little laugh. I just buried the only reason I have to live. What should I fear? "Well, in that case, there is no need to dwell on. Perhaps I should also tell you that I am not afraid to hurt you if you don't tell me what is going on." "You have nothing to lose. I understand." "Then talk." "Very well. The time machine's principles are not difficult to understand, and a working model is not difficult to build. It was, or will be, discovered again in 1968 by Dr. Anne McGregor, and then again by Dr. Sam Beckett in 1999, then again after the Great Collapse by the revisionists of the Second Era, and, when they have destroyed themselves, the horrible living machines of the Third Era, who attempted to undo the diverse paradoxes and time snarls their predecessors left behind them. The Nexial agents, who travel as amnesiacs, form the fourth era of time travel, and so on. Age after age, and civilization after civilization, until the Denalians of the final era. I meant talk while making sense. What do you not understand? If you touch the time machine, if you make any effort to use it, all the events which you set in motion become, for you, actualized, a real possibility. The events springing from those possibilities become real. And this includes those time travelers downstream of you, unhappy with your actions, who seek to revise them. Revise how? The simplest way. The least complex energy state, as it were, to prevent time paradoxes, is to kill the time traveler just before he starts. I said, and so you've never touched the thing. You were afraid someone from the future would pop into existence next to you and shoot you with some sort of ray gun? Why not go back and prevent your parents from ever meeting? The fact that you are still standing here now... He shook his head. Men still have free will. Not until the very moment I use the time machine will I have stepped into the fourth dimension. They would have to stop me right at that moment. There are time-energy considerations involved. He looked at the brass copper machine and sighed. Oh, I've polished it, replaced old wires, kept the jars charged. I've sat in the saddle, toyed with the levers, yes, even powered up the solenoid and heard it hum. When I wanted to remember something I'd forgotten, for example. But actually to attune the device, to actually attune the cylinder and engage the drive? No, I have never done that. I said, you don't know me. What if I climb on that thing and just fly away? Become master of the world myself? Why take the risk? I must see if it works. What does that mean? Must. He spread his hands. Can I explain the agony of living with this thing in the attic so many years, unable to know whether the machine actually works or not? A machine I am afraid to touch? Perhaps everything I read was a lie. Perhaps it is merely a stage magician's trick. I cannot live on faith. I have to see it. I have to see it work with my own eyes. So, if I jump on this thing, this magic time travel machine, every time traveler from hereafter to eternity might come gunning for me? Fine. You picked me because you know how badly I need to see her. See her alive, I mean. I'll play along. But there is one condition. What is that, Mr. Wint? Tell me your name. It would mean nothing to you. Tell me anyway. If the time cops arrest me, I won't talk. They will not arrest you or question you. When they act, they kill. My name is Professor Pajo Mandik. I am descended from Tesla's sister, Milka. I turned again and threw my leg over the saddle. You said the machine moves through space as well as time? Guided by what, exactly? Professor Mandik stepped behind the machine and turned a crank, so that the large copper disc behind the saddle started slowly rotating. He threw an old-fashioned double-throw switch, and the crystal bar between my legs began to glow. I wondered if my legs were wrapped around something radioactive, even though it was too late to worry about such a thing now. I always wondered when I had started to believe any of this might be real. But the fact that I was nervous the antique contraption might blow up made the hope that it could carry me into yesterday seem possible. Professor Mandik said, touch your ring to the axis of the cylinder and engage the first lever. It controls how many days per second, subjective seconds, you will be in motion. The second lever controls how many degrees into the fourth dimension you will be rotated. The greater the angle, the less contact you have with the three-dimensional world, and the less time, subjectively, your voyage will take. If you stay at less than 45 degrees, you will see the sun like a ribbon of fire, and winter snow appear and disappear in blinks of an eye across a vast panorama. If you find yourself suffering from motion sickness, use that leather sack there." The first-time traveller discovered an odd yaw and pitch and sway which made him nauseous. "Wait, what are you doing?" Because it was not my wedding ring that I touched to the cylinder then. It was my crucifix. If I could visit anyone in the world, any time, any place, who would I go and see? I had only one opportunity. Yes, I wanted to see my wife again. I would have given anything to see her again. It would be like an amputee regaining his lost right arm once again. But there was someone I wanted to see more. I needed an explanation. Pause for coffee. I landed, or materialized, or whatever the word is, at the foot of a cross, on which a man hung, dying. The sun was beating down and the flies were crawling on his face, and he cried out when he saw me. Such a cry of hopeless pain I've never heard. Immediately, I leaped from the machine and went to him, to see if there's any way I could get him down without hurting him further. He croaked at me, a word I did not understand. The nails were not driven in through the palms of his hands, as it is depicted in a religious art, but through the middle of his forearm, between the radius and the ulna, which looked even more painful. Other spikes had been driven in through his lower legs, between the tibia and fibula. He was naked, which is also not the way he was usually depicted in the religious art. I could see insects crawling through his pubic hair. He did not have a free hand to scratch them or pluck them away. Only then did I notice he was not alone. There were many more than two hanging to either side of him. The man to his immediate left had died, and hung there motionless, his head bowed, withered like a mummy in the sun. Perhaps I was still queasy from the gyrating motions of the time machine, or the sudden change from cool night to scalding day, but the sight of so many naked men, all dying, all with bloodstains marking their arms and legs, all gasping for breath, and the stench of their wounds crawling with flies, made me lightheaded. And some of the men had voided their bowels after being raised up, so smears of fecal matter ran down the bases of the cross and the legs. Worst of all was the sound, the gasping, grating, harsh, and horrible sound. It was all those men fighting desperately to breathe. Not many people talk about how crucifixion works. It is one of the most painful, humiliating, sadistic, and lingering deaths ever invented by man. The victim is hung by his arms to put pressure on his rib cage so he cannot breathe. The exposure will eventually kill anyone strong enough. But before that, the pressure of all the body's weight suspended from the dislocated shoulders, after several hours, or days, weakens the same muscles in the chest used for drawing breath, until the victim can no longer breathe. In order to take a breath, the victim must straighten his legs, which are also nailed by spikes to the cross, and this relieves the pressure for a moment, so he can draw in a ragged, gasping lungful of air. But eventually, his legs lose their strength, and ever so slowly, ever so painfully, he is unable to lift himself. And so in the end, he suffocates. The fortunate ones die more quickly of shock and exposure. I stepped around to the base of the cross, not because I had any thought in mind, but only because I saw no way to get him down from the front. The splinters were driven into his buttocks and back, which was raw, red, and bleeding. The spikes protruded through the wood, but I did not have any carpenter's tools. I pushed helplessly at the red point of one spike with my fingers, not because it could do any good, but only because I could not stand by and do nothing. I looked left and right. There were about 24 or 30 men nailed there, all total. Some were children no older than 14. Some were greybeards already dead, and crows were eating their eyes with stabbing motions of their beaks. That looked perversely like a kiss. Perhaps some of the others, if they had been immediately flown by helicopter to a modern emergency room, could have been saved. "Hoi! Get away from there!" This was in Greek, which I did understand. I looked to the left. I saw a group of dull-faced children, bellies bloated with malnutrition, throwing stones at one of the crucified men whose eyes had been torn out by birds, hitting him in the crotch and belly. Grinning little dull-eyed, gape-mouthed grins when he moaned and thrashed. They scattered at the voice. The voice came from a little ways beyond them. A man in the iron helm and segmented leather skirt of the Romans was standing near a fire of coals, warming a bit of food on a stick with an open flask nearby. I remember how impressed I was at that. In a place like this, reeking as it did, he could eat his picnic luncheon at leisure. He reminded me of a friend who worked in a morgue and could eat a ham sandwich next to a ripe and newly sawn open corpse without thinking twice about it. People get used to things, including things they shouldn't. There was a second soldier with him, but he was lying down, having propped his shield up with his spear, to form an impromptu parasol to keep his head in the shade. The soldier slowly picked up his javelin, a 4-foot length of wood and iron with a wooden tip, and slung it across his shoulders with 8-sided shield set with a lightning bolt motif. "Stay back, you. The traitors' bodies are property of Rome." At this, the other man, hanging to the left and right, now stirred and began crying out. Some in tongues I did not understand, others in Greek and Latin. But I understood them. They were crying for water. I remember reading somewhere that starving men lose their sensation of hunger after a while, but men dying of thirst merely get more and more thirsty as they die. The mummified man I had thought dead now stirred to life and called out to the soldiers in Latin, "Break my legs! Break my legs! Die! Let me die, the land of shadows!" They were calling out to the soldiers, their tormentors, for water or for a merciful death, not to me. The soldier was now close enough to prod me with the butt of his spear, which was a lump of lead the size of a child's fist. "Is your head in the air? No gathering blood, necromancer. We don't want your black magic. You barbarians are civilized now." Necromancer? He could not even imagine I was looking for a way to help the dying man. I said to the soldier, "I am a stranger here, and have lost my way." He wasn't interested. He stepped close to me, so close that I could smell the fish and alcohol on his breath, and backhanded me across the face hard enough to knock me down. My Latin classes had not encompassed first-century cursing, so there was a lot in what he said that I did not follow, but I got the gist. "Is this the way you talk to your betters? I march under the arms of Rome, cur. My children will be citizens. Don't lift your eyes to me." I started crawling backward, inching toward the time machine, but he stepped forward and stepped down with the iron sole of his marching sandal upon my hand, driving it into the warm, blood-stained stones of the execution ground, pinning me in place. "I did not give you leave to go." "I lost my ways, sir," I pleaded, gasping with the unexpected pain. Only now did he take in my untimely garments. "I'll say, what are you? A Saxon? A Scythian?" He peered suspiciously at the machine. "Your cart seems to have lost its wheels." I did not raise my eyes to him, not wanting to be beaten again, and reviled myself for my cowardice. "Robbers," I said. "They took my horse too." It is hard to know a man's mood if you are afraid to look him in the face. That made it risky to lie, because you cannot gauge his reaction. "Horse?" "Donkey," I corrected. Horses were creatures of war, not used for other purposes. I was in a time before the invention of the horse collar. The plough horse was a thing of the future. Slaves ploughed the fields. Why didn't they take your... What is this? He was no longer stepping on my hand, but had strolled over to the machine. This big copper disc. It is for astrology, to read the stars. Oh, you tell fortunes? He raised his voice and called out to the other soldier. Oi, Kratis! Come and find out if your wife is whoring on you round on you. We have a soothsayer here. The other soldier grunted a word I did not know. Probably another swear word. If I may be permitted, sir, I said, I can show you the secret. May I rise? He was curious and waved me over to the machine, and he did not stop me as I slowly seated myself on the saddle. I had never opened the double throw switch before, so I need only tap the handle once, clicking the second wheel over, and this put 10 days between us. This time it was raining, and there were still crosses along the roadside, but no one was occupying them. My landing startled a pack of dogs, sniffing hopefully at the foot of one, and they ran off, yelping. The time machine did not have an umbrella or hood, and I wondered how well the works would stand up to being rained on. I squinted at the dials and added up days by the tens and hundreds, and arrived at a figure. I was sure I had made a mistake, and then checked again. I had not arrived at 33 AD, the date I expected the memento of the crucifix to land me. I am not sure if I counted correctly, or added leap year days correctly, or remembered the date when the Julian calendar switched to the Gregorian. I had landed in 3 or 4 BC, the Nativity. I could see, despite the rain, that the country around here was pockmarked with small caves. I picked the nearest one, and began hauling the machine toward it on its skids, seeking a place to hide it. After about an hour of sloshing through the rain, and later sweating in the sun after the end of the brief shower, I had a bright idea. I walked to the cave, looked around, picked up a small chip of rock, walked back to the machine, sat on it, held the rock to the cylinder axis, and tapped the lever lightly. The world blinked and I was in the cave. I returned the wheels to the original setting, worked the lever again, and poked my head carefully out of the cave, and heard myself talking to the soldier 100 yards or so away. I pulled some dry brushes in front of the cave mouth, and walked parallel to the road for some time, afraid of being seen by any soldiers and horrified by the nightmarish line of crucified victims dying in the sun. Eventually I passed the last occupied cross. Not many minutes' walk after that, I came across a line of people walking the road, some driving laden donkeys. They were not dressed as colourfully as one might expect from a Hollywood costume drama, and no one there even came up to my shoulder height. I am not sure how odd my clothing looked, in dark trousers and a white shirt. I had removed my coat and tie, leaving them in the cave with the machine. But no one gave me any close looks as I started walking alongside of them. I tried once or twice to start a conversation with my fellow wayfarers, first in Latin, then in Greek. No woman would talk to me at all, as each pulled their shawls in front of their faces and turned away. The men flinched and mumbled something apologetic in tone and cast their eyes down, and would not answer any more than that. Something in the foot-weary way they shuffled, the way they kept their eyes down, reminded me of photos I'd seen of various war-torn times and places. These people looked like refugees. At one point, we all walked past something that looked like an energetic troop of Boy Scouts had made. Tall poles lashed together with a line, with a small platform topmost. I almost did not recognize it as a watchtower, until I saw the eagle on a pole above it. The all-conquering Eagle of Rome. At the foot of the watchtower, 2 soldiers were beating a man and taking his donkey, which was a young, healthy animal. They threw his bundle off its back into the dirt. and drove him back with blows from the butts of their lances. They led the young donkey away, laughing at their good fortune, to a paddock that had that same Boy Scout precision lashed together expertly look as the watchtower. I should mention the clothing and gear of the Romans was handmade, like that of the natives, but it looked as if it were handmade by better, more competent hands. It made them look like a superior race of beings, and that superiority showed in their voices and postures and the light in their eyes. It was the immense confidence, no, the pride, that comes from knowing that you can trample another man's face and tell him to kiss the sole of your boot, and knowing that he would. Not refugees. I did not recognize what I was seeing because, well, frankly, no one has ever occupied Kansas City, or hung rebels up by trees by the roadside to die slowly in the sun, with spikes through their forearms and thighs. They were a conquered people. All the hope that had been beaten out of them. The conquerors methodically killed anyone who caused any trouble, anyone who showed too much leadership, too much initiative. They killed the hopeful ones. A trio of small, raggedy children now darted out of the crowd of the road, and made as if to snatch the bundles and fallen belongings of the beaten man. His head was bloody, and maybe he was dazed, because he did not stop them. I ran forward, shouting, slapped the biggest child, the pack leader, across the back of his head, hard enough to make him drop the loot. It was a crudely woven cloak or bedroll, nothing more, and the other urchins screamed like birds and fled. I put the bedroll back with the pile. The pile was more than one man could carry, which was why he had been using a donkey. He stood there looking at me with big eyes. I saw the look in his face, the empty, wary look. He was expecting me to pick up some choice belonging and make off with it. He thought I was a lion beating off jackals, not someone trying to save the deer. Instead, I passed him my handkerchief. I motioned to his head. I pantomimed daubing the wound. He said something in a dull, dazed tone. I said, "Do you speak Greek?" I actually used the word koine, which I remembered was the word for common Attic. Coffee? In the same tongue, he whispered, "Beware, they watch." It was true. The Roman soldiers were looking at me with flat, cold-eyed stares. They probably did not like my height and my straw-coloured hair. It is not my fault I was raised in Kansas. We have to be tall enough to see over the cornrows. "Let's get back with the others," I said. "I'll help carry the load." He looked a little stunned. Maybe he was just surprised, or perhaps he was literally stunned from the blow to the head. He tied the bundles together neatly and quickly with a rope, and took the larger of the two. And I took the larger of the two, and slung it across my shoulder. We stepped back on the road, and the people near us quickened the pace, or slowed, to give us a wide berth. "What's the matter?" I said. "Why didn't anyone else give you a hand?" He looked confused. "Hand?" Idioms don't translate well. "Help. Aid." He grunted philosophically. "They are sons of Israel, whose false temple is Jerusalem. The true temple was at Gerizim. It was destroyed by Yohanan Girhan, called Hyrcanus, 100 winters ago. And now the Holy One wanders the earth without a home." Now it was my turn to look confused. This did not refer to anything I knew from history books or Bible stories. What is your kindred?" I used the word genus, which is vaguer and could mean anything from race to nation to species. "Ah, I am the son of Sahir, of the sons of Pencas, of the line of Issachar. And how should this servant address his master?" I was not used to Middle Eastern exaggerations of politeness, so it took me a moment to realise he was asking my name. Jonathan, son of Jacob, I said. It seemed odd to me that, though I was born in a hemisphere not discovered yet, 3 millennia away, my name and the name of my father sounded normal here. At your service, sir, I finished, and realised that his form of courtesy was not so alien after all. We shook hands, or rather, when I extended my hand, he wrapped his fingers around my wrist, which was almost the same. "Why do you walk the road?" he asked. "I am lost." "You must be very lost," he said wryly. "I am seeking Bethlehem of Judea," I said. "You mean Bethlehem." My ears could detect no difference of pronunciation, but it seemed I said it wrong. "It is but a short walk hence. This is the road. Where are you from?" He was looking at my blonde hair. "I am from the farthest north." "I have heard of your land. No wonder your hands are softer than a woman's. It is so peaceful there, so unwarlike, that men kill themselves out of boredom, merely to idle away the time. Yes? I thought farthest north was just a story." He had heard me as if I had said farthest north as one word, which in his term was Hyperborea. I grunted, thinking of deaths from drunk drivers and drug overdoses and heart disease caused by obesity. Indirectly, these were all forms of suicide by self-indulgence, which was another word for boredom. Do you know, there could be some truth to that story. I am northern too, but not so far as Hyperborea. That is why the sons of Israel were pleased to see the Romans fall on me. They walk apart from us, so that any watching Roman knows that we are easy prey. That is cowardly, I said, but my anger was mingled with pity when I said it. I was from a nation that had never been conquered, dropped down in the middle of a land that had been conquered by practically everyone. Bin Sahir assumed a wry philosophical expression. If it lets them move along the roads without being robbed, who can say a dark word of them? We treat these Jewish swine the same when they are in Shomron. Now I understood. You are a Samaritan. Are you good? Ah, none is good save God alone. When the Romans savage the sons of Israel who walk our roads, we stand aside and look on. Better them than us. And what else can we do? When you fight the Romans, these trees grow fruit. He nodded at a group of blood-stained and offal-stained crosses, topping the rise by the roadside ahead. There were 10 crosses together, empty at the moment, but the number of crows hovering in the air and strutting proudly along the ground, fearless of men, was ominous. Men should not treat each other so, I said. As for that, it will be the way of the world until he comes, the Christ. The last almost made me stumble. What do you know of the Christ? He rolled his eyes. Is that not the word in Greek? We call him Messiah. That is the word. What do they say of him? Those who count the generations say the world enters a new age soon. What does that mean? Count the generations. Count the years to the new age. From Father Abraham to David the king, 14 generations. And from David to the Babylonian exile, 14. And it has been 14 generations since then. So, as history waxes and wanes like the moon, the time of waxing is nigh, and the Messiah will be born. He will smite the Romans and the heretical southerners, and rebuild the one true temple at Gerizim, the greatest conqueror of old time. Bin Sahir shrugged. Of course, those who count the generations also say the Messiah was due 3 generations ago, but then others say we should omit Ochaziah, Joas, and Amasiah from the king's list because of their wickedness. And that God adds another generation of waiting for every evil generation. You know how astrologers argue. We wait and they give a date, and it rolls by and nothing changes. And the Romans hang out more fruit for the crows to eat. I will believe in the Messiah when I see him with these eyes and not before. You think he is coming to throw out the Romans? Is that all? Isn't that enough? No human power can defeat them. Should we hope for something even greater? Not just to restore our kingdom, but also to conquer theirs? Ugh, strange and wondrous indeed if all the Romans would bend the knee and serve the God of Abraham. But that will never happen. Never. Don't be so sure, I muttered. Be that as it may, said Ben Sahir. My father says the Greeks were worse than the Romans. The Greeks did not enforce their own laws, and they used their slave boys as girls. Greeks here? You must be from very far north. It is only 50 or 60 years ago. Hyrcanus and Aristobulus fought for the throne when the queen died, and Pompey the Great aided Hyrcanus, and the rule passed to the Herodians and Romans, who came as guests, did not leave, but stayed as masters. And it is not as if the Greeks living here suddenly vanished or went home. Before that is Alexander the Great, he said. He half smiled, but his voice was infinitely weary. Before that, Cyrus the Great, and before that, Nebuchadnezzar the Great. All the great men of history marched through our land to tread upon us. There is rebellion in the air, he continued. The Romans can smell it. They've conquered everyone, so they know the smell of mutiny growing ripe. Why do you think they've declared tax-gathering time? Never before have we been ordered to march the roads to the houses of our fathers and pay the tax there. It is not Roman law. Come, you learned man. I can tell from your outlandish accent. You make the mistakes learned men make. You learn the language from books. Why do you think they are taxing us this way, now, at this time? Forcing everyone out of hearth and home? I shook my head. I was already sorry I had volunteered to carry his load. The sun was declining to the west, and it was cooler now. But my legs were aching, and blisters were developing. What I would have given for a bottle of insect repellent. None of the short and wiry people around seemed to be having any trouble. Call it the soft living of the Hyperboreans. I was too out of breath to ask. You might think it was to scatter any whispering groups of young men daydreaming of the days of the Maccabeans, he said. I think it is to show us we are whipped dogs. To show us they could march us to Egypt if they wished, or off to the edge of the world. After that, I had no more breath for talking, and we trudged on in silence. Ben Sahir's short walk turned out to be almost farther than my aching legs could carry me. As we neared the village, the Romans had more corpses on display, but these must have been the people of higher class than traitors and slaves, because instead of crucified bodies, they displayed severed heads hanging by their hairs from wooden poles of a small fortress surrounded by a ditch outside the town. The fortress had a distinctly Old West look to it, which I did not expect, being made of sharpened logs set upright, with a dry moat around it. It was called a village, but it had been at one time larger, because I could see the ruins of walls half toppled over, and naked gateposts with no gate, but an ox yoke lashed across the top. The huts and hovels, some of stone, some of mud, some of timber, occupied less than 1/4 of the land inside the crumbled line of the ruined walls. I should mention that the climate was not what I expected. Perhaps I had seen too many Hollywood biblical dramas, and so I was thinking everyone would be dressed in burnouses, and the land would be desert. They were dressed more like Greeks, in tunics and cloaks. I was surprised at the number and size of the trees, and the size of the fields, both cultivated and fallow. Maybe it was a climate cycle, or maybe the Romans would cut down all of the trees one day, soon to make more crucifixes. But at the moment, there were trees, and many houses were made of wood. The rooftops were flat, and many had little tints or sails on the top of them. I was not sure what they used them for. Pause for water. Bin Sahir parted ways with me, explaining that if I ate pork, I could not stay at the same inn as the clean people. But he gave me a few coins and pointed at a large house done in a clearly Greek style, as if it had been yanked up from Athens and dropped down here, with decorative amphorae and statues of gods and goddesses on the roof eaves. There were, before the doors, also stones decorated with gods, with wings for ears at ground level. But these had been defaced by some vandal. Or maybe it was an art critic, because I saw the broken stone penises, large and erect, which the vandals had hammered away with a stone. There was a wooden sign nearby with two severed hands, a left and a right, nailed to it, and some inscription in Latin and Greek and Aramaic that I was too tired to puzzle out. Probably a pragmatic Roman epigram on keeping one's art criticisms to oneself. Something in the sight of the careful craftsmanship of the obscene statues seemed to me to be as grotesque and inhuman as all of the images of torture and conquest, but on a subtler level. What kind of world would adore as sacred some demeaning images, and maim and kill to preserve them? I stepped into the common room, which was crowded, practically packed shoulder to shoulder, but everyone stepped out of my way when I approached a man standing on a chair, whom I took to be the landlord here. He was arguing and cursing with a knot of bellowing men around him, or perhaps it was an impromptu auction, because all of the men were waving fistfuls of money, or something that looked like necklaces of beads, small coppery nuggets of uniform size. I did not know any place from history book in this particular quarter of the world that used beads for money, but maybe something slipped through the cracks of history, or were not written down, or not remembered. For some reason, the shouting fell silent when I walked up. Maybe they thought I was a giant. I mentioned before how no one here was as tall. While I was not exactly stout, I was certainly well fed, and so I was broader than anyone here. I showed the landlord the coins Bin Sahir had given me. I had no idea of their value. "Don't tell me, let me guess," I said. "There is no room in the inn. Do you have a stable out back where you put little kids with glowing halos, or shepherds who hear voices from the east and 3 wise men from the west?" "And 3 wise men from the east?" He said, "There is a room for you, stranger, for strangers like you. We have a room set aside." He whistled, and a little kid with a straight back black hair that gleamed as if oiled came trotting out of a short door, leading to some sort of enclosed yard, where they were cooking a fatted calf over an open pit. I should mention all the doors were short, and I barked my head on the ceiling beams more than once. The kid wore a dirty smock and an iron ring around his neck. The bellhop, or rather slave boy, did not look me in the eye, but beckoned, and I followed. He led me across the courtyard. In this style of building, all the windows faced inward, toward a common courtyard, and there are no windows in the outer walls to tempt robbers. Of course, a motivated robber could just shoulder his way through the walls, which were thin boards roughly cut, daubed with just enough plaster to keep out the wind. Stupid as it sounds, I was repeatedly surprised at how rude and handmade everything looked. The bellhop showed me to a room the size of a closet, which stank with the rich, ripe odour of the many previous inhabitants, and pointed at a straw mat crawling with lice. The room was also equipped with a ewer of water, unless I was mistaken, and it was also the chamber pot. Presidential suite, eh? I said to myself in English. I showed the bellhop the coins, which the landlord had not taken. In Greek I said, "Do I pay now or pay later?" I was shocked when he replied in English. His accent was odd, clipped, as if he was used to speaking at a much faster rhythm of cymbals. "The natives deem it bad luck to take money from time travellers." I spun on him and made to grab him by the throat. But his metal collar made a loud popping noise. I got a shock to my hand and arm, like I had grabbed an electric eel. I stumbled backward and sat heavily, breathing deeply and hoping the dancing black spots in my eyesight would not overwhelm me. The little noises from the rooms to either side, voices and motions, fell silent, as if the inn were holding its breath. "You are late 20th century, or early 21st, the kid said in his flat, strangely accented voice. "Wristwatches and telephonics of that kind were not made after the Endarkening, and you have made several temporal disturbances which no one, not even a revisionist of the Second Age, would make. You are a pre-Nebogipfel chrononaut, a rare find." I realized that the people in the room to either side were not holding their breath, or at least not willingly. The silence was deeper. I could see over his shoulder where the cockpit and the courtyard was. The reflections of the flames on the walls should have been leaping. Instead, they were frozen. Little bugs in their clouds were still as a photograph. It was as if somebody had hit the pause button on the video of the universe. "Who are you?" I managed to say. "I am a mote of the cosmic sculpture of the 6th era of the time travellers." So, everyone in that common room knew I was a time traveller? Of course. Bethlehem at this time of the retrograde motion of Jupiter and Saturn in conjunction? This is the most thickly investigated spot of all history. But no one has ever found and killed such an early chrononaut of your strata. Killed? Wait a minute. I have not done anything to you. Have you not? And now the flat, unemotional accent, if anything, grew even flatter and more monotone, and the kid's eyes, which suddenly looked very old and very wise indeed, bored into mine. "The man whose burdens you carried was fated to be helped by someone coming a moment later down the road, whose daughter by that happenstance he would meet and wed, from whose bloodline sages and sacerdotes would spring, and military leaders, including the founders of the Antarctic Republic in the 42nd century, after the time of the Great Thaw, and the discoveries of polar zodiacal energy will enable the foundings of colonies on other worlds. All of that line and its manifold accomplishments you obliterated with your thoughtless blunderings. Millions of lives have been lost or changed. You have no instrument for detecting temporal potential. You do not know who is important and who is not, who is crucial to history and who is not." With this, he pulled the collar off his neck, and so he held a C-shaped bend of metal. He pointed the ends at me. "You, for example, have no potential at all. You will never return to your life and have no effect on history. Therefore, nothing remains but to—" The room was no bigger than a closet, and Moat Boy, cosmic or not, was no taller than my waist. I made a lunge for him, grabbed him by both arms, and smashed his head into the wall. To my surprise, it worked. I was sure he would zap me with some hidden superweapon if I moved. To my bigger surprise, the wall broke inward instead of the kid's head. The boards were thin, and the plaster, or maybe it was mud, was less than a half-inch thick. His head went all the way through, up to the neck. The biggest surprise of all, when I yanked him back inside, I realized I was holding a dead body. The top of his skull had been burned away, his face blackened as if his head had been thrust into a lightning bolt.
I could smell cooked brains. I was confused. This was not something merely smashing a head through a thin board could do. The pause button on the universe unpaused. Firelight in the distance started flickering, and the noises of bird and man and beast started up again with a roar. I grasped the semicircle of folding metal the kin had been wearing as a necklace, thinking this was a gun, some futuristic laser gizmo which had accidentally gone off. But there was no button, no trigger, no muzzle, nothing I could see. But I heard a noise in the air above. It sounded something larger than a bird moving. I stuck my head through the hole, hardly the first stupid and impulsive thing I'd done that day, and saw only a large shadow. It was man-like, but larger than a man, and it held a long wand or tube in its hand as it disappeared into the clouds of sunset. It seemed to be riding a horse, or perhaps a flying motorbike. Even as I saw the figure, I was not sure if it had been a trick of the eyes, a shape in the cloud, another time traveller from some era after the 6th, someone who did not like the way the events turned out. Professor Mandic had mentioned that, in order to avoid paradoxes, or minimize them, the time travellers would wait to the last moment. Perhaps this meant that something was happening now that the moat boy had been trying to stop. It was then that I heard singing. They were not the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, but they were better than an average dozen men from my time would have been, because we only sing on Sundays, if that. Whenever we want to sing, we don't have to do it for ourselves. We snap on a radio. Even people from my grandmother's day were all better singers, so she insisted once, than the folks of my generation. Pause for coffee. Whoever they were, that choir, that was the event the moat kid did not want me to hear. But now I found that I was in the ridiculous situation of being held like a prisoner in the stocks. The splinters of the wood I had shoved my head through were now snug against my jaw and ears, and I could not draw my head back without impaling wooden points into my jugular. It was as if I had stuck my head through a fish trap. On second thought, I did not want to go back and explain to the landlord about the bellhop, whose skull had been blasted in half lying in my room. And I could already hear noises behind me. I figured I had less than a minute before people without modern man's ideas of privacy peered in to see the source of the cooked meat odour. So I straightened my legs and pounded with my fists and broke my way through the rest of the wall. I did not pay attention to any noise behind me. I just ran. The streets of the village were narrower and even more crooked than when I had been prowling through the alleys of Rome. But I could hear the voices, and I kept turning toward the singing. I smelled them before I saw them. Shepherds. They were even more ragged and work-worn than the people I had seen on the road or in the inn. Their hair and beards were long and lank, as if they had never known soap or shears. None of them had anything better woven than poncho-like rough cloak to wear, or a dirty loincloth. But they had sticks in their hands with crooks at one end, or some sort of hook or loop of leather for drawing lambs back, the same as the one carried by little Bo Peep. Some things don't change with time. I must have startled them when I blundered suddenly into the midst of the narrow street. But these men did not flinch or draw back or slap my face or step on my hand. They were all smiling cheerfully, as if they were happy to see me. I spoke to them in Greek, and then in Latin. I don't remember clearly what I said. It might not have been very coherent. I doubt these simple hill folk, the yokels of first-century Palestine, understood the tongues of their conquerors. But, of course, they knew what I wanted. I wanted to know why they were singing. What was the news? What was going on? You don't need language to understand that. You just need to be human. One of them, thinner and more careworn than the rest, blind in one milky white eye, and with ugly growths on his cheek and neck, took me by the hand and led me back the way the others had just been coming. It was a little way outside the town. We just stepped through a low spot in the toppled wall, where the growing grass had already made a green path like a stile. He pointed at a cave. "I'm looking for a stable," I said. "A stable with a baby in the manger, and a big honking star sitting right on top of it, with 3 kings of the Orient are. Maybe a little drummer boy too." The shepherd just pointed again at the cave. Now, in the dusky gloom, for the sun sank below the horizon rapidly at this latitude, I saw a little flicker of butter-yellow light, like a reflection from the smallest lamp, somewhere in the depth of that cave. The shepherd gave me a little shove and went back, grinning. As he skipped off, he raised his voice in song, his hands over his head, twitching left and right with the rhythm. I could not understand a word of it, but I could hear his whole heart was in it. I could hear the gratitude. As I got closer, I saw there was trampled earth around the cave mouth. I could smell the smell of dung. Then I heard the lowing of cows, the bleating of sheep. The stable was in a cave. Who puts a stable in a cave? On the other hand, considering how flimsy the last wall was that I broke through, maybe it wasn't that bad an idea. There was a man standing, leaning on a tall staff, in the shadow to one side of the cave mouth. He was bald on top, but with ringlets of silvery white hair reaching from his ears to his shoulders. A beard as white as snow reached nearly to his sash. His robe was finely made, especially in contrast with the grimy half-naked shepherds had been wearing. Bold patterns of blue and scarlet stripes, with threads of purple running through it. He looked up as I approached, and his eyes were so noble and stern that I thought I was looking at some wise king out of a storybook. But they were so kind and sad that, if it had been a storybook, it was a story about a king long banished from his home, a prince whose forefathers in their pride and folly had been toppled from the throne that he would never see. The land under his feet, which was his by right to rule, he walked through as a stranger and an exile. My mouth was dry, as is mine. "I want to see the child," I said. I said it in Greek. And when he merely looked at me, motionless, silent, sad and stern, something welled up in my heart that I cannot explain, and tears came into my eyes and I sank down to my knees. "Please, sir," I said in Latin, "I need to know. She's dead. I need to know there is a reason. I need to know there is a hope. I need to see the child, that he's not just a story, that he's not just a lie. Everyone says it's a lie." He put his hand on my shoulder and leaned forward and kissed me on my mouth and wiped my tears with his thumb. Then he pulled me to my feet. But then he tapped the heel of his staff against my shoes, first the left and then the right, and he nodded, making a little gesture with his eyebrows. "Oh," I said, "like the Japanese, are you? No shoes in the house?" He nodded. I slipped my shoes off. He made a wide sweep of his arm, like a king throwing open the doors to a palace for a visiting dignitary, and motioned me to enter what was, after all, a stinking stable. The ground was cold underfoot, and there was straw and quite a bit of dung, and I wished the light were better so I could see what I was stepping into. Well, sometimes you have to walk without seeing. In the distance there was a little light of a brass oil lamp, the kind Aladdin rubs to get a genie, shedding less light than my phone gives off when I pull it out of my pocket to check the time. There was darkness between here and the lamp. Why he trusted me, a giant stranger whose language he did not speak, to be alone with his wife who had just given birth, that I cannot guess. I barked my head once or twice, so by the time I came to the small flickering circle of lamplight, I was bent and holding my skull. Because I had just struck my head through a broken wall not 15 minutes ago, it was covered with dust. I am sure the young girl thought I was bowing, or had poured dirt in my hair to show grief or repentance or something. She was sitting on the ground, and there were at least 3 other people with her. The closest to the lamp was a smiling and crooked old crone, to which the little girl spoke a word that was, even though gently said, unmistakably a command. Again I was surprised. There was, of course, no reason to assume Mary and Joseph travelled alone in this day and age, or did not have servants. In my grandmother's time, even she, who was by no means a rich woman, had hired help come by on washing days and to help with the spring cleaning, and my grandfather had hands for the farm. The girl was very young. Maybe she was 16, or maybe she was 14. I suppose in the ancient world, anyone above 13 was considered an adult. Considering the life expectancy, maybe 16 was middle age. To be honest, I was appalled at how young she was. Who marries a girl at that age? And who travels with her while she is pregnant? Who makes her bear such burdens? She rose gracefully to her feet, holding the babe in one arm, cradled against her naked breast. I did not think it was right to stare at a young girl's naked breasts, even if she was a mother, so I tried to keep my eyes down. But with her free hand, she touched my cheek and wiped the dust from my hair, and made me to stand up straight. There were calluses on her fingertips. Women who did a lot of weaving get them, from pulling the threads in the same way over and over. Young as she was, she had already seen her share of work. Despite having servants, these were not rich people. And I suppose even in that day, even rich women wove. I wish I could tell you how pretty she was. Her eyes were calm as a sea which had never known a storm, never felt the slightest wind, but were clear and blue deep into infinite deeps. It was like looking at the crystal bar of the time machine, as if they opened into another dimension. It was like, how can I put this? As if I were Tarzan and had been raised by apes and was seeing a real human being, a normal human being, a woman who looked just the way women were designed to look from the beginning, seeing one for the first time. I said something then. I don't remember what. It must have been asking to see the baby, who was, by the way, very energetically suckling, his little jaw moving as tirelessly as a machine. The bent old crone came forward with a bowl of water and offered it to me. I reached to take it, but she poured it over my hands, and then wiped my hands with the hem of her shawl before I could stop her. Then she knelt and splashed my feet, and wiped them likewise. I realized then that not all the water in this land stank. It was just that room at the inn that had not bothered drawing fresh water from the well. Another servant, this one a wall-eyed old man in dire need of dental surgery, offered the girl a small clay cup, which she passed to me with her free hand. The final servant, a man with a whip-scarred face, whose ears were cropped, handed the girl something that looked like a stone. She put it to her mouth and tore it in half with her teeth, offering me half. It was sourdough bread. I drank the wine and ate the bread, grateful for the hospitality of the Middle East. The wine of this day and age had a grimy residuum at the bottom of the cup, looking all the world like tea leaves in an old-fashioned cup of tea. I started to toss the dregs of the wine away, but the girl put her small hand on my hand and made me drink the whole thing. Not daring to offend the custom of hospitality, I drained the cup to the lees. Then the illest man took the cup away. Without a word, she handed me the child. I wish I could say he was cute. No, newborn babies are only cute after a few weeks. He was still red from birth and wrinkled like a lizard. The umbilicus had been cut away far from the navel and tied with a red thread. In case you want to know, Jesus Christ is an outie, not an innie. I have always wanted to have a child, always wanted to hold a baby in my arms. I know most women love holding babies and few men do. I am one of those few. My wife, for reasons still painful for me to dwell upon, was not able to have children. She had led a wild life as a teenager, aborted her firstborn, and suffered complications as a result. Holding that frail life in my arms, so young and so precious, seemed a miracle. I held him close, delighted with his warmth, with the living weight in my hands. The stink of the animals was in my nostrils, but the warmth shed by the animals made the cave like an incubator. I was already blinking, trying to keep the sweat on my brow from getting in my eyes. It stung in my arm, and my eyes swam with tears. I was wondering why in the world any mother would hand me her child to hold. The girl looked at my face and spoke in Aramaic to the scarred man. He bowed to me and spoke in Greek. I am Echved, son of Imich. My lady greets you and seeks peace to you. This is Miriam, daughter of Joachim, son of Eli, son of Levi, and Anna, daughter of Phanuel, the high priest. Peace. Peace to you and to your lady. I am Jonathan, son of Jacob. She spoke again. Her voice was like music. Pause for coffee. She says the child is the son of David. He is the king. The king belongs to the people. Whose arm should uphold the king, if not the people, will not hold him? She must have seen the look of surprise on my face when she handed him to me. Or maybe she could read minds. I had been riding a time machine that afternoon. I was a time traveller, almost killed by another time traveller, so at this point, I was not sure what I could believe. The baby reached out, grabbing the crucifix hanging on a fine chain round my neck, and tried to put it in his mouth. My hand twitched because I was torn between the need to get the choking hazard away from the baby, but also to support the baby's head, and I did not have 3 hands. The girl must have seen the look of helpless male panic on my face, because she reached up with her small hands and neatly plucked the crucifix from the tiny red fist and the hungry little mouth. The girl inspected crucifix with a wide-eyed stare, tilting it to catch the lamplight. She said something in Aramaic. Her tone was one of innocent wonder, delight at finding such a strange mystery. The scar-faced man said, "My lady wishes to know what you are and where you are from, that you would willingly carry so finely crafted an image of the death by torment. Only slaves suffer so near your heart. It is an abomination. In what lands are such things made?" The baby in my arms was so fragile. The girl seemed so happy, so serene, I could not say anything. She spoke again. Ben Emeth said, "He that is hanged on a tree is accursed." "No," I said. Ben Emeth looked offended. "What do you mean, no?" I thought of my wife's unborn child, who had never lived, and whom I had never seen, never held, and who had never been mine. There are men who are fulfilled, even if they are never fathers. I am not one of them. I was no longer blinking because sweat was stinging my eyes. Now I was weeping. I had been seeing it in my heart over the grave. A boy I could hold. I would have helped change diapers and bottle-fed him, made sure the apartment was child-safe, no pennies on the floor a baby could put in his mouth. I would have bought the right kind of safety seat for the car, the kind made of lightweight, space-age material, with a basket that unhooks from the seat for ease of carrying, and a stroller, and taught him how to walk. I would have been home for his first word. I would have tickled him and made him giggle. And later, baseball and Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts, and First Communion and First Love, and teaching him how to tie a bow tie and how to fold a rifle and how to clean a rifle, teaching him all the words to Impossible Dream from Man of La Mancha. how to tell the truth, how to raise a child when his turn came. Everything. I would have taught him everything. Maybe he would grow up to be a doctor and heal the sick and save their lives. And if my son, the healer, if he got arrested for a crime he did not commit, I would have done anything, sold the house and the car to hire the best lawyers. And if he was bounced from one kangaroo court to the next, and witnesses got up and lied about him, I would keep hoping someone would give him justice. I would appeal. First to the Sanhedrin, then to Herod, then to Pontius Pilate. Someone would see he was innocent, that he had done no wrong. But what if no one did? What if the politicians and the powerful people of the world, the priests and the princesses and conquerors decided to kill him? Would I keep hoping then? What do you mean, stranger? Said Ben Emeth again. Beneath his scars and the wrinkles of his age, I saw that he had once been a handsome man, no doubt young and brave. He did not like people contradicting his mistress.
And we're back. Sorry about that, my battery died. Taking up for where we left off.
What do you mean, stranger? Said Ben Emeth again. Beneath his scars and the wrinkle of his age, I saw he had once been a handsome man, no doubt young and brave. He did not like people contradicting his mistress. I mean no, I told him. In a time to come there will be one who, when he is hanged on a tree, is not accursed. His death will seem a curse, but it will be a blessing for all men, of all times. The scarred man and the girl spoke in Aramaic. I could not understand the language, but her tone was curious and innocent, brave as a kitten who had never been hurt, and gentle, but gentle like a queen is gentle, who does not wish any hard word of hers to wound her loving and loyal servants. I had only ever heard politicians in my whole life, never someone who loved and led a nation as a mother loves her child. There is something in such a voice you cannot mistake when you hear it, because there is nothing like it on earth. Ben Emeth turned to me. My lady asks in what land is the pain and horror of crucifixion a blessing. She asks where you are from. What are you? I am lost. My own lady is lost. Tell her my own lady, my very own, is lost. I have no idea what my face looked like, or what they were afraid I might do, but the girl very firmly and gently took the child from me, and then and there unwound the cloth she wore as a headscarf. This was linen, and was white, and lined with blue. She turned and put the tightly wrapped child into a little nest of hay in the feeding trough. She said something over her shoulder to me. Ben Emeth was behind me. She says you will be comforted. You will be found. One who will be your attorney and speak the word. She smiled over her shoulder and busied herself tucking in the baby. He was asleep. Even as a baby, was he not divine? How could he not know what was going to happen to him when he grew up? How could he sleep like that? I was wiping my eyes, feeling foolish, feeling full of wonder, and feeling I know not what. I said, Tell her she should sleep when the baby sleeps. Ben Emeth translated the comment, and the crone laughed and the girl smiled. The girl spoke one last time. Ben Emeth said, Bow your knee, and the mother of the king will give you her blessing, since under the ancient law of David that is her right. You have come far to receive it, farther even than the shepherd band. Ask of her, with what blessing she shall bless you. I got down on one knee, and the kneecap of my pants landed right in the plopping of a cow dropping hidden in the straw. I suddenly realized that everyone in this cave must be insane, including me. That baby was just a baby, puny and red and weak. The world outside was a nightmare A world ruled by sadists who worshipped obscene things, and even the Jews and Samaritans served God by slaughtering each other, and slaughtering cows and sheep and turtle doves. A God too pure and remote to do anything, no matter what prayers were said or how many cows were burnt. No matter how many prayers you said when the tests came back positive. No matter what you said you would do or would not do, or how much faith you had. He did not listen. Not to you. I was kneeling in a stinking stable in a cave. My face still hurt from where the Roman soldier had slapped me that afternoon. Nevertheless, I said, ask her to pray for me. Pray for me now and at the hour of my death. I want to see my wife again. I want to hold her, be with her and talk to her. The girl stood up and moved toward me with footsteps so smooth she seemed to be gliding. She put both hands on my head and said something in her liquid tongue. I felt a flush at her touch, as if my hair were trying to stand up, and the sensation moved from my head down my spine like a warmth through my body. She again touched my chin and bade me stand up. She smiled and gestured to the mouth cave. The audience was over. I turned once to look at the child. The tiny oil lamp was behind and beneath the trough of hay where the baby slept, and the yellow light slanted through the wide, crude slats that caught the wisps of hay sticking up around his tiny head, so that a circle of gold, like a crown of fire, hung there. If my eye had been an inch to the left or right, I would not have seen it. I blinked and it was gone. I walked away into the night. In one hand I had a fistful of straw that I was using to wipe at my knee, to get the clinging filth off, and then with the other hand I was wiping my face. I had now started to sob in earnest. I had come for answers. I had actually seen the Messiah, held him in my arms, something every Christian had probably wanted to do. And so there was no answer for me. What now? Find the machine? Climb on, go back to a year when my wife was still alive? And then what? Knock that version of me over the head and replace him? Pile her on the machine and find a time in the future where anything they could cure everyone of everything? Behind me was a little warm cave lit by a tiny light, where the cure for everyone and everything was supposed to be, and it had not cured me. And I had forgotten my shoes. Feeling like a fool, I turned and walked back over the cold ground. But now it was completely dark, and the tiny glint of light from the oil lamp was gone. Frugal people did not waste oil at night. I could not see the cave mouth. After a few moments walking, I was sure I had gone too far, and now I had turned again and went the other way, or what I thought was the other way, and darkness where it became cold very quickly in the gloom. I pulled out my phone and opened it, hoping to use the screen as a flashlight. But it had run out of power at some point. I could not remember the last time I had recharged it. I had not prepared for a hike, or to go climbing, or to go time travelling. I had not even brushed up on my ancient languages, or brought a compass, or anything. I had followed a crazy man in a top hat, the descendant of an equally crazy scientist, because I was half crazy myself that morning, alone by the grave. Not one of her family had come. Not one. I stubbed a toe and stepped on the stinging insect at the same time. It was like a white-hot needle being plunged into my heel. Jesu Christi! I shouted in English. Then, hoping God would not notice I had been swearing, I quickly said, forgive us our sins and save us from the fires of hell, and lead all souls to heaven, including those most in need of thy mercy. Then I had an idea. I closed my eyes and just listened. There were lots of animals in the village, and maybe more than one cave was being used as a place to stall animals. But if I was still near the cave mouth, maybe I could hear something. Sure enough, I heard bleating. It was a young sheep complaining about something. I groped my way in the dark in that direction, stepping on every sharp stone and thorny bush in Palestine. I did not find the cave mouth, but found the sheep. By that time, my eyes had adjusted to the starlight. It was a young lamb, a baby sheep. The lamb was by itself in a little hollow, and there were thorn bushes all around it, but no cave and no shoes. I turned away. The poor fellow bleated so pathetically I looked over my shoulder. Believe me, pal, I know the feeling. I took a step and he bleated again. I sighed, then I sighed again. I took off my shirt, wrapped it around my hands, and used that to push aside the nettles and stingers of the bush. I waded into the thorns for that dumb animal. Why? Because there was no one around to do it. Once inside, scratched and bleeding, I said, "Come on, sport." I pulled the lamb with a heave-ho up onto my shoulders. The lamb bleated loudly. By that point, with my luck, I was sure he was going to void his bowels on my shoulder. I was surrounded on all sides by thorn bushes. Where was the break I had just so painfully trampled? "Okay, sport," I said to the lamb. "You got in here somehow. Do you know the way out? Maybe back to the spot where my shoes are, not to mention a warm stall for you and plenty of yummy lamb chow? And why aren't any shepherds watching you this time of year? Did they hear voices singing in heaven and just leave their work to go look at the Messiah? I did that too, but she is still gone." And the lamb said, "No, the shepherd chief Asher asked Gabriel to watch us and see we did not stray. When we were alone with the archangel, he granted us the power of speech, which Adam the fallen king would have given us from the great tree, which fairest Eve the fallen queen robbed. So that once, and this once only, the paschal lambs could kneel and pray. Now we have a new Eve, and she has borne us a new Adam." I was too shocked to throw the talking beast from my shoulders. The starlight from one single star above me suddenly grew brighter, or my eyes adjusted, and now I could see the circle of thorns was not a circle, but a spiral. All I had to do was walk and turn again to be free, not to keep the bad course I was on. I took a step. "Are you a time traveler?" "No. They are thickly gathered here, but in vain. They are not permitted to see the child." "Why can't they see him?" "Do you know, Gabriel's asking me that just an hour ago. Why can't they see him?" This was an insane conversation. I laughed, trying to take things as they seemed. "So, you are a Passover lamb. Do you mind being eaten?" All who are loyal to the Master wish to be consumed, as he is consumed. For what other purpose was he born? For what other purpose was I created? The sons of Adam were given dominion over us, and gave us our names. As you live in him, so we live in you. "That sounds wrong somehow," I said. "Your ears are thick with folly," said the lamb. "I must be asleep," I muttered. "You will soon wake, as do all who sleep in the Lord," he said. "Now, ask your question I was sent to answer." I did not see the Star of Bethlehem, or the 3 kings. More than 3 mages will come, and they come first to Jerusalem, the city of David. They are horoscope casters and astrologers from the ruling clan of the Zoroastrians, and the Lord will show through them how he can turn evil crafts to good purposes. This is not for 2 years to come, but that is not your question. I drew a breath. "Are you the Comforter sent to comfort me?" "No comfort is given to the sons of Adam except after tribulation and temptation. You are in the fire. You are being refined. And that was not your question." Why does it hurt so much? This fire. You know. Because my faith is Saul? Because I love my sins? You say it, not I. And that was not your question. A cloud passed before the bright star. I stopped walking. The thorns were all around me, and I could not see the path. I said, "Will I see my wife again?" "You will see her again. She waits for you, robed in white linen, by the river of the waters of life, which flow from the throne, and a cup of those waters is in her hand. And her hair is woven a crown of the blossoms from the tree whose leaves are for the healing of nations. You must first suffer death, as the child will, and resurrection as he will. Beyond the trial is comfort, beyond the darkness light. But she will not be your wife there. None marry, nor are given in marriage. The union is more intimate. And still, that was not your question. Maybe I should ask why you people always speak in riddles. Maybe I would answer that you people never ask the right questions. I knelt and put him from my shoulder. Kneeling, my face was near his muzzle. I was looking to see if this was some trick. To be honest, I wanted him in front of me. If the cloud would pass away from the star so I could see whether or not his lips were really moving. That was when it finally struck me. And despite the tears that still stained my face, and the bleeding scratches all over the rest of me, and the Roman hand-shaped bruise running from my ear to my jawline, I started laughing. I could not help it. It was too funny. The lamb just looked at me with big, solemn eyes. I didn't mean to laugh, I said, hiccuping and trying to control myself. I wanted to see if your lips were moving. And then you see, I met this time traveler in Rome, and he was afraid to use the time machine. And I used my crucifix instead of my wedding ring, so the machine led me here. And then there was this dying guy with no pants on, and a Roman punched me like you'd kick a dog. And this little kid from the 6th cosmic sitcom or something or other, who wears electric jewelry, got his brain blasted when I shoved his head through a wall, trying to kill me, on account of I didn't let Antarctica conquer the moon in the 42nd freaking century. And St. Joseph kissed me on the lips, and I held baby Jesus, and now I want to see if your mouth moves, because I'm afraid of being tricked. You know, because some things are too hard to believe. Don't let yourself be fooled. Seeing is believing. Listen, the little lamb said. I bent my head toward him, but he said nothing. What is it? The little lamb said, Do you hear what I hear? In the distance I heard a bell tolling. It was a solemn, slow, beautiful sound. It was so lovely to hear that the crazy laughter died on my lips. The lamb said softly, That is the alarm bell from the Roman fort, foretelling the downfall of the pagan world and all its arrogant love of cruelty. The Christian world to come shall be cruel as well, but it will be a world that will not love cruelty. Every bell on the face of the earth is ringing this night, from the Pillars of Hercules to Ultima Thule, to the springs of the Nile to the Forbidden City and beyond. The bells sing in joy for the Saviour's birth. The stars also sing, but only my masters, the shepherd's band, heard them. Asher, Zebulun, Justus, Nicodemus, Joseph, Barshaba, and Josie. They had prayed, you see. They pondered the words spoken to Job, and wished to know when it shall be that the morning stars sing together, and all the sons of light shout for joy. This is that night. There is no war being waged anywhere, on any front, for this one night and this one alone. Will you finally ask your question now? I drew a deep breath. It seems so stupid. God uses the fools of the world to confound the wise, Jonathan. I closed my eyes. Why me? Of all the historians and sages and widows or widowers who suffered a loss, and saints who kept their vows, and wise men and everyone else, everyone in the world, why was I given a ride on that machine, and allowed to come here, and allowed to hold him in my arms? That little baby who holds the universe in his. My eyes popped open in shock. Oh, good grief, I forgot to tell her that Jesus would be in the temple when he turned 12. That he was in the cavern. I could have saved her all that grief. What the hell was I thinking? I mean, heck. Be of good cheer, said the lamb with perfect seriousness. Your prayers will sustain and comfort her, whether you speak them now or later. Eternity entertains all prayers at once. And now comes the one who will answer you. I saw a light in the distance. It was clear enough that I saw the path again, and so, without any more mishaps with the thorns, I came into place, where the ground was clear of rocks and nettles. It felt like turned soil under my feet, and the earth was cool and soothed my aches and stings. The light was a lantern being held in the hand of a being shaped like a man, dressed all in white, purer than any white earth could make. Over his shoulder was a shepherd's crook. Tucked through his belt was a golden horn. On his head was a hood or veil which hid his eyes, but I could see his nose and mouth. "Rise," he said, because I had recognized who he was, and my knees failed and I collapsed in panic. "Fear not. I am but a fellow servant of the same one you serve. See that you do not bow to me. I must return the lost lamb to the fold." I said, "Gabriel, were you really washing the sheep so the shepherds could see the child?" The great being nodded slowly beneath his veil. Why was I allowed to see him, and not all the other time travelers, and not everyone? He said to me, "Lost lamb, if you were the only man alive, the only one who had ever sinned, and every other son of Adam had remained pure and upright, it would all have been done for you. For you the child was born, for you he lives and dies. For you." The living being raised the lantern, and I saw it was a spiral galaxy inside the glass, not a candle, and clusters and superclusters of galaxies. "It is all for you. The stars love you, and he who, by his word, lit the stars and set them dancing, from the greatest to the least. Everything in the cosmos, all the light of all the world, to the blood shed by the Messiah. It is all for you, John Wint. And more than a mere cosmos. Eternity and infinity are yours. Endless light, unbound joy. You shall be rejoined with the one you love, and all the ones you love. And the love will be greater than mortal tongues can pray to ask or praise in thanksgiving." I did not know if he meant I would meet her that very hour, or only after many long seasons of light in this eon or many others. But I knew then that it did not matter. Only one question mattered. Why? 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 I shouted at him. Gabriel smiled, and he leaned, and he spoke very softly in my ear. "Do you not give gifts to those you love?" The end. Thank you very much for being with us for this episode of Celt Can Cook. I hope you enjoyed. In the meantime, you're watching Celt Can Cook, the Scottish cooking channel that encourages young men and women to have the confidence and competence they need to conquer the kitchen. Be seeing you.